All right, we start in the second section of the summer law course. We begin with defamation. We're going to be dealing with defamation in the form of libel, which is printed or broadcast defamation. We also have spoken defamation known as slander. We are not going to deal with slander because we work in mass media. Slander has a different set of rules because it's about the power of your voice that is powered by your voice. Even though we speak defamatory things in broadcast, it is the power of the broadcast signal that carries it much farther. So put slander out of your head. We all know about defamation. We know the nursery rhyme about the power of words. The sticks and stones. Words can hurt you. Sometimes we wish someone would punch us rather than say the words that we're forced to hear. What is defamation? For our purposes, it's going to be an unprivileged published statement that damages somebody's reputation. You can be sued for defamation in a lot of places. News story, press releases, fiction, photograph, websites, songs. Yes, Eminem was sued over song defamation. Cartoons, ads. You can be sued over a tweet. Courtney Love helped to establish that point of law just a few years ago. In order for a plaintiff to succeed in a libel claim against us as media defendants, the plaintiff must prove the 5 fingers of libel. First is publication, second one is identification, third is defamation, fourth is damage, and the 5th is fault. The plaintiff has to prove all 5. If the plaintiff can only prove 4 or just 2, the plaintiff will not prevail in a libel suit. Let's start off with the first finger, publication. A third party must perceive the defamatory statement. What that means is if we're in a room together, just you and I write on a card, "You have a loathsome disease," and I show it to you, and then I put it away before anybody else comes into the room, no publication has occurred. No third party has seen that. But if I show you the card with "You have a loathsome disease" and you snatch the card out of my hand and then you wave it around when students come into the classroom, it still is not publication because self-publication is not publication. There are some exceptions. They are pretty esoteric. We will not run into them in our professional careers, so just don't worry about that. There is a special note on publication, especially now with controversies surrounding churches and religious beliefs. In some states, if you're in a group, say you're a congregation or you're a company, if you communicate within that group, then there's no publication because in the group you all have a common shared identity. But once it goes past the group, then you have third-party perception and you do have publication. The single publication rule, you print 250,000 copies of the paper or your stories on 250,000 television sets, you only have 1 lawsuit. Same thing if your newspaper goes to 4 states, you only have 1 lawsuit. We also deal with statute of limitations. The statute of limitations puts a set time that a plaintiff has in order to initiate the lawsuit. In California, it's 1 year, and the statutes for the 50 states, 1 year, 2 years. We have the infamous case of Keaton versus Hustler back in 1984. New Hampshire had a 6-year statute of limitations. That's now been made more reasonable to be a 2-year statute. Be aware that if your story is more than a couple of years old, if you reprint it, then you start the clock on a new statute of limitations. Warford versus Lexington Herald, a newspaper did an investigative series of sports on basketball. They had a defamatory statement in one of the stories. They cleaned it up and fixed it. Then the series won a National Newspaper Reporting Award. So the newspaper decided to do a reprint. And they printed all the stories in a special tab. The problem is they didn't make the corrected version in the special tab. That reprint with the original libelous statement created a brand new libel publication and created a brand new statute of limitations. Same thing for if you're an author. A new edition of a book, when you have the opportunity to make changes, starts a new statute of limitations. The Doctrine of Republication is a key element for us in our business. The doctrine says if you repeat somebody else's defamatory statement, you adopt it as your own. This gives a lot of people heartburn. I won't tell you how many broadcast news people have come to me and said, but we didn't repeat it, we simply ran the tape of them saying the words on camera. That's still republication. You chose to put it out in front of your audience. You put it out on your website, in your newscast, in the pages of your newspaper. You republished that damaging statement, and it's yours. You can be sued for it. We have the case of Owens versus CBS, a television news story about a threatening letter to President Reagan. The reporters broadcast a defamatory statement, one neighbor saying bad things about another neighbor, and the ensuing libel suit, the television station said, wait a minute, we just verbatim quoted this person. How can we be at fault? And the court explained, when you republish the defamatory statement, you created a new cause of action based upon your new publication. We have some protections based upon changes in technology and society. The Communications Decency Act, Section 230. That section of the Communications Decency Act of 1996 says that Internet service providers are protected from defamation suits when those suits are brought against them for the content that they carry. Now, this is content that they carry. If the Internet service provider is creating content, it will have liability for anything that it creates and publishes on its own. If you are posting something on an ISP, you have no immunity under Section 230. Jurisdiction, the plaintiff can sue where the defendant has established minimum contacts to justify giving a court power over the defendant. And what that means is if you're in California and your broadcast signal goes into Nevada, or your newspaper is circulated in Nevada, then you're doing business in Nevada, and if you libel someone, then the plaintiff can bring suit in Nevada. In Berry versus Gordon, the New York Daily News, way on the East Coast, libeled one of the founders of Motown. He is a resident of California. Because the New York Daily News had subscriptions for 13 Sunday papers and 18 daily papers, the courts found that the Daily News had established minimum contacts within California that gave California courts jurisdiction in the libel case. And of course the question is, did the publisher intentionally direct the publication into the state? That's important because think about where the internet is published. It's everywhere in the world. And we have the case of Young versus New Haven Advocate. The warden of a prison in Virginia was the subject of a story by a newspaper in Connecticut. He didn't like some of the content. He wanted to sue in Virginia, his home state. But the courts there said, well, the New Haven Advocate, while it appears in Virginia because it's on the internet, hasn't really directed business toward the state of Virginia. It does not have sufficient minimum contacts in order to grant jurisdiction to a Virginia court. Warden Young, if you want to sue the New Haven Advocate, you're going to have to go all the way up to Connecticut and sue them in their home state. Still in publication, live defamation. We have the example of Summit Hotel versus NBC, and it may be a little strange to you because it predates your lives, predates your parents' lives as well. Back in the way old days of network broadcasting, we didn't have traditional commercials. There was no 30-second spot or a minute spot. What we had was the sale of blocks of time. NBC Radio would sell an hour's worth of its time to somebody that wanted to put on content and then promote its own goods. Texaco might buy an hour and they would put on the Texaco Cavalcade. Soap manufacturers would buy 2 hours. NBC was simply carrying the signal. In Summit Hotel versus NBC. In Summit Hotel versus NBC, a program was running on NBC. It was a block of time that the network sold. During the program, the host of the program was interviewing a golfer who had just won a national title. The interviewer asked the golfer about his beginnings in professional golf. The golfer said he started out as the golf pro at the Summit Hotel. The host then interjected, "That's a crummy hotel," and the interview went on. The Summit Hotel was not pleased with this, and so they brought a defamation suit against NBC saying that NBC had broadcast a libelous statement that damaged its reputation. NBC responded saying, "We sold the block of time. We had no control over any extemporaneous statement that might be made. We had no clue that the host, the interviewer, would actually say something off the cuff like this." Ultimately, the courts sided with NBC, saying that this spontaneous defamatory utterance was not something that NBC would be responsible for. Keep in mind that the host who said the thing about the Summit Hotel, he would still be on the hook for a defamatory statement of his own. We also have to talk about a more modern case, Snowden versus Pearl River Broadcasting. A radio station in the little Louisiana town of Bogalusa was looking for a way to generate a larger audience. It didn't have much in the way of appeal. It was pretty much like every other radio station. It played music. So they hit upon the idea of doing a talk show, a live talk show. The station didn't have a lot of money, so they didn't spend the money to buy a 7-second delay machine. And the 7-second delay machine works like this. You speak the words into the microphone. It deposits your word onto a moving piece of audio tape, or today it's digitally recorded. And then there are 7 seconds between the time you say the words and the time it goes out over the air, which gives you that period of time in which to press the kill switch and bleep out what's being said. The radio station didn't buy one because they were pretty expensive. One day, a young man is running the talk show, and one of the callers wants to talk about drugs because the station had a program on drugs earlier in the week. The caller talked about Dr. Jerry Snowden, a physician in the town, and the caller was saying, well, Dr. Snowden will give you any prescription you want, and then you just go down to see the pharmacist, and the pharmacist will give you anything you want, and if you can't get a prescription from Dr. Snowden, you can go down to the pizza place and they will sell you any drug. The young man who was in charge of the talk show was over his head. He asked the caller not to mention names because it was polite, and it was the station's policy that they asked people not to mention names when they were saying something bad. The caller said, well, you know, you've had other people talk about people and they haven't had to give their name. And more callers came in with critical comments about Dr. Snowden, the pharmacist, and the local pizza place. They sued in the courts, in the Louisiana court system. They won. The courts in Louisiana said Pearl River Broadcasting had created an invitation to libel with its very loose policies on control of what people said and its failure to buy the 7-second delay machine. This is important to us because sometimes we will be going live, especially for broadcast news. And the question is, do you really want to? If you go live and somebody says something that's false and defamatory, you may have liability. Here's how you might have liability. If you haven't checked out the person you're going to interview before you go live, or if you have checked out the person you're going to interview before you go live, and you should have known that this person was going to say something defamatory, and you still put this person on the air, well, then you're going to have liability for that live defamation. Think about that. And we'll pick up with more defamation in the next video. Goodbye.